Chandler Woodcock is the Commissioner of the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. And we won't get 2 minutes into this show before we discuss what an interesting job he has. And I say interesting because when I look at what IFNW has to do, it's a challenge. You've got a lot of different conflicting things that you must accomplish. You have to manage resources that people actively want to put in the refrigerator.
Well, hopefully not all of those
not
resources.
All of them, but that's just it. Not all of them.
Not all of them.
You've got to manage that. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. In a state that loves to hunt and fish, in a state that loves to watch wildlife, critters are a big part of our culture and our economy. To be good stewards of all that wildness, you've got to be proactive. You've got to manage sustainably. And not just the game animals. There are many small critters that need stewardship too, because they're part of the food chain and the ecosystem. Some are rare and endangered. Much of the time, managing wildlife means managing us. People can damage these resources as much as nature does. The Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife gets that assignment, and the guy at the top is Chandler Woodcock. He manages the people you might see, like game biologists and wardens, and also hundreds of people you don't see. In fact, much of what the department does is almost totally invisible. Today, we'll try to make it a little more visible. I'm in Chandler's office. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, Doors Equipment, and EBS. Commissioner Chandler Woodcock, welcome to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have this opportunity, Bob. I've been looking forward to this ever since you asked me.
I feel like a kid in a candy store. We're going to talk about things we really love to an audience that also loves to hear about the game species in Maine and also the other things that IFNW does. So,
well, I think in the world of the media, that's unusual to begin with.
I know.
When you have both sides loving the issue.
It's true. You have an interesting job, which you've now been doing for about 6 years?
Yes, 6 years.
And I say interesting because when I look at what IFNW has to do, it's a challenge. You've got a lot of different conflicting things that you must accomplish. You have to manage resources that people actively want to put in the refrigerator.
Well, hopefully not all of those resources.
But that's just it. Not all of them.
Not all of them.
You've got to manage that.
So I like to tell people when I'm out in public making appearances that when I ride across the state, it occurs to me quite often that I'm technically responsible for all of the wildlife and fishery resources of this state, all of them. From butterflies to caterpillars to moose, deer, every species of fish. It can be pretty humbling when you look out across the landscape and realize how many creatures there are. So some people like to take them home and put them in the refrigerator. And I encourage that, by the way. If it's legally accomplished,
sure.
Have a nice meal on the state of Maine is great. But there are many species that some of them are quite rare, actually, that, as you know very well, that we oversee, that the people of the state of Maine and outside the state just absolutely love to deal with. Mm-hmm. So our most viable entity in the outdoors, as far as the public is concerned, would be birds. Bird watching is our number one activity. Shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody.
Not to me, it isn't. It keeps me busy.
I know. Everybody loves to watch birds, but we're responsible for all the species of birds, inland birds. I mean, that's a remarkable opportunity for us.
I was going to do that later in the show, but let's get right into it. The fact is we always think about the big game species and even small game species when we think about what does IFNW do. The fact is you have to manage the entire food chain.
We do, the entire food chain. And as I said before, it's pretty humbling to realize that because we have specialists in turtles, in bats, in butterflies, in salamanders, and I'm just picking off the top of my head here some of the species that we talk about on a reasonably routine basis. And yet we have the game species, too, that are more obvious to people, I think. But everybody seems to be enchanted with the state of Maine for its natural resources. We're a part of that enchantment management.
Yeah. Oh, I like that term. Can I steal it?
You may.
Enchantment management. Well,
royalties. It's all yours.
Well, I mean, let's talk about just briefly vernal pools. That has been controversial in the past because you have to be careful with them. It's actually known among the scientists that if you took a good productive area and you took every critter that comes out of a vernal pool, salamander, turtle, wood frog, all that, and put them in a pile, and then you took all the game species, every other species, all mammals, all birds, and put them in another pile, the piles would be about the same size.
Isn't that remarkable?
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, half of the wildlife, half of the biomass being produced in Maine are little things, creepy crawlers.
They are, and Vernal pools are an important part of the resource.
Yeah.
They could be man-made. Vernal pools are easily man-made. Sometimes in construction sites, you create low areas where water eventually settles, and in come the creatures that you're talking about. So we've had a regulatory discussion about them. I think what we're trying to do is manage them in an effective manner to protect the resource, yet at the same time allow the people who have land use some land use possibilities too.
Sure.
That's always a delicate balance.
Yeah, but it's basically you can still do what you want. You just have to do it more carefully.
Have to be careful.
Always been that way. And unless we want to look like New Jersey, that's what we're going to keep doing.
No comment.
You have responsibility for stewardship of wildlife, but you've got to do it meeting public expectations. There's a lot of process going into that, but just starting with that fact that you got to manage it, but here's what the public expects. That puts you between in the crosshairs a lot.
It does. I hear those expectations quite often in a manner that isn't necessarily always the most comfortable expression about how someone feels we should be managing a particular resource. I've lived long enough to appreciate that when someone has a personal pet peeve, they want to express their feelings, and I'm up for that. I've had many discussions with people that I wouldn't call them heated because the people are respectful of me, and I appreciate that. But they're very passionate about their species, and I'm going to give you an example of it. So we introduced turkeys to the state of Maine, and they are thriving in some areas. I mean, we have many, many hundreds, thousands in some areas, and yet we have none in other parts of the state. So the areas where they're located, they create some problems for people. They create problems for farmers quite often for a variety of reasons, and they'll express their concern, as they have in the legislature recently and they have in the legislature previously. Yet right across the street, down the road a piece, somebody's a turkey hunter, and they want to be able to preserve the resource to use it for their invigoration, if you will. So it's always a delicate balance. But I'm one who encourages your expression. If we don't hear from the public in a meaningful fashion, it makes it. We can manage. We'll manage the resource anyway. And I want to tell you, we're pretty conservative about management resources, and I mean that sincerely. When people say, "Well, how do you manage?" We manage in a conservative fashion because that's the best thing to do for a wild resource. You want to be very cautious about it.
Yeah, once you screw it up, it's hard to go back.
Hard to come back. It's very hard to come back. So we're cautious and conservative about it, but yet at the same time we recognize the multiple uses that these creatures create in our environment as humans who have come into this chain. We've entered ourselves in the chain. So once mankind gets in the chain, it changes the entire chain.
Having been chair of the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Committee now for over a year, one of the things that really struck me is that every hunter, angler thinks they can run the department better than you can.
Yeah, and that's what I was expressing earlier about people who express their opinions to me. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And I probably did too when I was a member of the public. I could run it better than whoever was running the department at that time. So now that I'm in the chair, I love the discussions. I love to hear people say, "Well, you're screwing things up." So sometimes it'll throw people a little off balance when you counter with, "Well, exactly what do you mean by that?" Because exactly what do you mean by that gets complicated.
Doesn't it, though?
It really gets complicated. So someone wants to have more fish in a pond. Problem is that someone's put another species of fish in that pond, introduced them illegally, and now the balance of the pond is off, so that you can't really have as many fish as you'd like because they're being consumed by other fish that somebody put in there because they wanted to have that fish to fish for. So we've entered it. We've entered the environment, sometimes in a very obtrusive fashion. We need to be respectful of what's out there. For everybody who's using our resources, we need to be really respectful of it.
Yeah, but what my sporting friends do is second guess the department more than any other department of state government.
Yeah.
It's really kind of fun to watch. We'll take a break. I'm in the office of Chandler Woodcock, Commissioner of the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. There are 3 things sportsmen love to do in the state: hunt, fish, and second-guess the department. But Mainers also love the department, an affection so strong that it may have just set a record. Well, that's coming up. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. It's Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. I'm with Chandler Woodcock today in his office in Augusta at the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. When we went to the break, Chandler, we were talking about how you as the commissioner get second-guessed a lot by the sporting community.
always has been the case, I think, with fish and wildlife.
Sure.
Always, yeah. We manage all those species, and people interact with the environment, and they love those species. And by golly, you guys are screwing it up. Although I would say, in our recent survey we did with responsive management, we hired a firm to do a survey of a couple thousand Mainers from all walks of life, that people were very pleased at the way we were managing the wildlife resources, fish and wildlife resources of the state. And I think, generally speaking, that's what happens in most discussions. As you know, I was a former member of the legislature. You're in the legislature now. You hear people on the far side of each issue express themselves in a very meaningful fashion, but most people generally fall in the center when it comes to discussions. And I think that's true of Maine's wildlife and fisheries. People feel comfortable where we have the experts. They expect you to use that expertise in managing it.
I have to say about that survey, it's Mark Duda was the gentleman behind it. Yeah. As you know, I've been a radio for, at this point, I'm closing in at half a century.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
And you've been a radio. I have seen a lot of radio research projects in the past, so I know what a good one looks like. This project that Mark Duda did for the department was awesome.
It was awesome.
It is some of the best research on any issue I've seen anywhere. I would express my appreciation again for that.
Well, thank you. It was comprehensive. We asked him to be comprehensive, and he's a national concern. He doesn't do it just for the state of Maine or for us. He's held in very high regard around the country for his research. And he offered to me that our agency had the highest approval rating of any government agency that he'd ever surveyed. And I told the group that last week. I said, you have to remember that we have we built up confidence in the public, in us, and we can't let that confidence fail. Do we make mistakes at times? Of course we do. I mean, we're human beings, but we're managing a resource that, as I like to say to people, we manage a resource that moves around enough where you can't count them perfectly all the time. Yeah. It's not a census of people where you go to your front door and say, what's your name and what's your family's name? Ask Randy Cross about doing that with his bear den. You've been on the bear den visits. We don't ask Mama how many cubs she has in there when you're crawling head first down in the hole.
No. I think what's impressive is that there's probably two things at play, why the survey came out so strongly in favor of the public's reaction to IFNW. One is that this state is just absolutely gaga over wildlife. It's in our DNA. We have this long sporting tradition where we go hunt and fish, but we also just enjoy seeing wildlife more than probably many other states can boast. Even outdoor rural states maybe don't.
Completely agree with you. And we have the diversity that other states don't have. We have an ocean environment, we have a mountainous environment, we have a different planting, farming, agricultural environment in the northern part of the state remains. So we have great diversity in terms of the habitats for the wildlife in our state. Big forests, ocean. I mean, that's remarkable. We're a remarkable place, and that's why you and I are still here, by the way.
Yes, exactly right. I wouldn't go anywhere else. I love this area. I think the other thing that you have going for you is just an absolutely incredible staff. I've gotten to know most of your biologists and a lot of your wardens. I'm basically almost half or more of the department I probably know personally at this point, and most of them have been here a long time. There's a lot of experience, a lot of educational background for your biologists. They're really good.
They have a very talented group. When I first came on, the government had offered that incentive retirement for employees of the state of Maine's government, and we lost over 200 years of experience in that retirement group. And one person I think had been here 47 years. So you lose that experience. You think, well, what are we going to do now? But first of all, they're still around as a resource. They don't like to leave a lifetime profession. People who work in the outdoors continue to love the outdoors. There's no way around that.
No, right.
And then we have this fascinating young crop of scientists that are coming in with more technical expertise, more energy. That's what we have for turning things over in any department. And I'm just fascinated by the mix we have. We have a wonderful group of 300 employees in this department, and they handle a state that is, if I'm remembering correctly, geographically is bigger than the rest of New England combined.
It is.
So pretty impressive, our group of people.
You can take just about any other New England state and stick it in Aroostook County.
I heard some fascinating, I think it's the biggest county east of the Mississippi. I think I heard that the other day.
Yeah, I believe it is.
Which I hadn't struck me as being that size, but once you start driving up there, you probably could reinforce that a little bit. And I love the county too.
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of my family came there from the past, came down through New Brunswick, the Aroostook County. So I love Maine. I just love this state. I always have. I've been around a lot. So have you. when I come home to a darn good place.
Yep. Now, we talked about the diversity, or you talked about the diversity a moment ago, and Maine really is very different that way. When I was born in New Hampshire, and even from very early childhood, I just looked across the border at Maine and said, geez, they've got everything New Hampshire has, but much more of it. I was practically born to move to Maine.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that about you, that you live right nearby. The diversity of our state involves a rather complex management.
Yeah, well, that's just it.
It has a really complex management. So you have to be able to put people in positions where that complexity is clearly understood. Mm-hmm. When you're researching sea ducks, it's a heck of a lot different than research. I'm going to get in trouble with the former commissioner here, but partridge up in Franklin County.
Oh, geez.
I'm sorry to all the rough grouse people out there. Partridge up in Franklin County. It's a different type of research. It requires a different understanding of the creature that you're researching, and that's what continues to fascinate me is the expertise of our staff.
Yeah,
in that area.
Yep. In particular, I think I keep thinking of Brad Allen, who goes out to.
Oh, Brad. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I find most fascinating is most biologists are also sportsmen.
Mm-hmm. They are. That's true.
And some of the best birders I know are very good at birding because they've got a keen eye for anything that moves.
Well, it seems so trite to say that sportsmen are the best conservationists, but actually they are the best conservationists because without their ability to consistently help manage the population, you wouldn't have a viable population. Mm-hmm. And I think the respect that sports people have for the resource of the state when they hunt and they fish is a pretty intense respect. I mean, if you've hunted deer at all in your lifetime, I hold that creature in the highest regard, mostly because they've outsmarted me for 50 years, over 50 years now.
That's right.
But what they have to be able to do just to survive, to get their next meal, it's something that we don't comprehend real easily. I mean, the environment of this state is difficult. And when we go on searches for people, the places they end up, it's just extraordinary to me that anybody could survive in some of the places that we have here in the state. The creatures have to.
Yep. Well, I mean, this came up during the whole bear controversy. The fact that you can't see bears in Maine woods the way you could in Colorado because our woods are just that thick and impenetrable in some places.
And I hunted in Colorado when I was in the military. You can see a long way out there by getting up on a ridgeline with a spotting scope.
Yeah.
First of all, you have to find a ridgeline where you can use a spotting scope in Maine. And once you find it, what you're looking at, generally speaking, are more trees.
Yeah, exactly.
It is. It's a different place. I think we're fortunate that it's a different place because that gives us the diversity, the opportunity for the diversity too.
And let's go back to the diversity again because we really are different from border to border. Southern Maine looks like much of the rest of the Middle Atlantic states with sandy beaches where the endangered piping plover lives.
Yep, exactly.
Then you get in the western mountains, and we'll talk bird again. Bicknell's thrush, which you have the responsibility for in the department. They're on the mountaintops, but nowhere else. And then you get into northern Maine, and you've got rare woodpeckers up there that you won't find even south of Bangor. So
people come to us for those reasons, though. Mm-hmm. So I remember the storm surges we had it may have been a decade now, but a few years back. And I saw a couple of people out in Southwesters, the rain outfits, and I'm wondering, in a really nasty day, and I'm wondering, what the heck are they doing? And I couldn't resist asking one of them, and he said, well, the storms have brought these, I would call them exotic species, actually, up to the state. I'm sure you may even remember the circumstances. We had species that we didn't normally have up here, brought by the winds and the environment. And I went home that night and I told my wife, says, we have some interesting birds coming up here now. Mm-hmm. Not that I'm a bird watcher, but I love doing it when I have the opportunity. So it was 3 days later, we had indigo bunting in our backyard. Mm-hmm. It's the first time I'd ever seen one in my life because I'm not a birder. I don't go chasing them around. And I asked about it and they said, well, it's because they've been moved around a little bit more than normal. Mm. So, and we've got Judy Cabuso. Judy, the owl lady, our head wildlife biologist here. What a remarkable woman she is. She's a birder, and you know Judy well.
For a long time, I have to say.
Yep, she and my wife went down to her house when she was doing the owl count so that she could do that also. Judy continues to impress me with the fact regularly that this state has a wonderful bird opportunity for people to come here and see what we have, because we have some really unusual species in unusual places, which was your point earlier.
Yes,
unusual places.
Well, I'd love to get into the working forest. I have led tours, and I still do, and I've been doing it in a Baxter State Park for a decade. I now take people into the woods west of Baxter State Park and the industrial forest much more because your ability to get around to interesting and unique places is actually pretty good.
We haven't had to search for you yet, have we?
Not yet.
Okay, all right.
I know those roads pretty good.
Oh, okay. All right. Roads. So you're saying
roads.
Okay,
No,
I feel better. Thanks, Bob. I feel better.
Chandler Woodcock is my guest. He's commissioner of the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. He's got the baton and he's conducting the band because more than anything else, managing wildlife is a dance. Public policy has to dance between what's good for people and what's good for wildlife. Nowhere does that get more complicated than in the state legislature, where senators and representatives may have their own ideas about management, often urged on by their constituents. Now, I should know, I chair the legislature's Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Committee. Dancing Explained, next. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, Saturday mornings at 9, Sunday mornings at 8 on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket, except for the next 2 weeks. It's high school basketball tournament time starting next week. The Saturday show will start at 8 a.m. with live tournament action following at 9. So next weekend, we'll be on at 8, both Saturday and Sunday. Today, Chandler Woodcock is my guest. I'm in the Commissioner's office at the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife in Augusta. Just a mile up the road, the legislature makes the laws that IF&W has to carry out. There's always a dance where the desires of the legislature may not quite match up with good biological science or enough money to carry out the public policy goals the legislature sets. So how does that dance work out, Chandler?
Yeah, well, it's challenging. Okay. You know, as I said, I'm a former member of the legislature. I was in the Senate and dealt with some issues in the Fish and Wildlife Committee when I was on it. The legislative process is a separate portion from us. You know, we're an executive branch, so we deal with the legislature in a different fashion. But I'm respectful of the attempts they make on behalf of their constituencies. So what you have to end up with it is a discussion, a thorough discussion, and a product that's most viable for the resource. Mm-hmm. Now, that gets rather complicated because,
doesn't it, though?
Because the users want to make it most viable for them sometimes. So, and I don't think I've learned this since I've been commissioner because I was an outdoor person anyway, but I think it's really been reinforced with me that you have to be very cautious to err on the side of the resource. And that upsets some people. Mm-hmm. You know, we make restrictive rules sometime that people would love to see more availability to them to be able to use the resource. If we did that, you'd lose a lot of the resource. So we can't be in that business. We're conservative about managing a resource that I want to see around for my grandchildren and their grandchildren.
Mm-hmm. Well, nothing is more signature to that than moose. We have a moose challenge right now. We built the population up to what was maybe estimated at 70,000, but winter tick and climate changes are putting some pressure on that population. You have some people who really want to expand their moose opportunities because that's a highly coveted animal. But if you diminish the resource, you can get it down to the point where it can no longer reproduce fast enough.
Moose is a really fascinating topic, and I've learned so much about this topic from Lee Kander and all the people who've been involved in our collaring of moose project that we have going on right now and the research behind it. So we're involved with other states in the province of New Brunswick also in that research. New Hampshire's been very key to us in that research project. So we're trying to examine the effects of winter tick, examine the other concerns we might have with moose. How does hunting impact it in a positive or a negative way? Generally speaking, hunting doesn't have a huge impact on the moose population or deer. Mother Nature has far more of an impact on the resources. Now, that's one thing you learn the longer you live on this planet. But one of the fascinating theories about moose is rather contradictory to many people's thinking. And I've read this from a researcher in Alberta who's an expert out there on moose. He strongly feels that you should have more moose hunting availability. Mm-hmm. You should thin the moose out more because they'll have a better reproductive cycle, first of all, and secondly, they won't have the ability for ticks to move as readily from moose to moose, from carcass to carcass, while they're alive. Mm-hmm. So you need to have a thinner herd. But that's really contradictory to the notion that many people have about managing moose. We get criticized a lot for you're killing too many. You're killing too many cows. Mm-hmm. You're killing too many bulls. We want to view them, and I understand and appreciate that. But the science would like to see them a little thinner, so that they'd have the opportunity to have a better survivability. Mm-hmm. Ticks are a concern. You know, if the weather continues to warm, ticks will be more of a concern as they move northward. But we had a pretty healthy group this winter, pretty healthy herd, I thought.
I'm not hearing as many complaints about finding moose in the woods this year as I did previously, I think.
And we inspect them, almost all of them, if not all of them, when they're tagged. And I didn't have anybody express a concern to me. Some of them had ticks, of course, but pretty clean.
One of the things I think most amazes me about the department and what it does and what its biologists do, when you're managing species, you actually know how many there are. I've watched you guys go to work to figure out what is our population density, and you're able to actually put a number on it.
Well, I'm not a big fan of the numbers, and I want to say that on your show. You can make a big deal of it on your show, but I'm not a big fan of the numbers.
Well, then I will.
Because it sets an expectation for people. You know, like when the number of 75,000 moose came out, Lee Cantor made that announcement at the committee when he was doing his moose report. And my deputy commissioner turned to me and said, "Have you ever heard that number before?" And I said, "Nope, I haven't." I said, "Oh, that's going to be a problem." So Lee and I had a conversation. And it may have been reasonably accurate. They don't hold still long enough to count them. I just said that a little while ago. So we don't know. We never will know exactly.
Yeah.
But what we do is a density count and then multiply it times the factors of the forest management, et cetera, and come out with a figure. I'm always a little hesitant to think that we should have too exact a number. The old days, people estimated. They didn't have the ability to estimate we have today. It's a different process. So I think the numbers may have been somewhere in between older times and now for most of the creatures that we count. I just know that our success rate this year at 73% was exactly on the average of historic success rate. So when I look at that, I'm thinking we're reasonable still. You know, we're reasonable.
Well, we have tools that we didn't used to have when it comes to science. Right. You can now fly over the state and map exactly what the state is, what all the habitats are. If you do sampling of how many critters can stay in each one of those habitats, and you know how many habitats you have, you can come up with a reasonably good number.
Reasonable. It's a fascinating process. You heard Lee talk about it the other day in the committee about how he flies around the state with the help of agriculture, conservation, and forestry pilots in a helicopter with his team with him, counting moose in grids. First of all, I'm not doing that whether I've eaten recently or not. I just want to tell you that.
That was death-defying.
Oh, gee.
There are circus performers who would not do that.
I have the utmost regard for Lee and his group when they go out sometimes on Sundays, Saturdays and Sundays, and mornings, as you heard him say. When the weather's good, we're flying, and he's doing circles around moose when I'm thinking I probably wouldn't be able to do circles.
Yeah, I need to check with him because I think his chopper just flew over my house. No, seriously, my wife says it sounds like a military helicopter is going by. This was a couple days ago, and I happened to be outside clearing some ice off the deck, and I said, "Oh no, that looks like a Forest Service helicopter. I'll bet that's Lee."
So does he have a Duchesne count that he's doing along with the moose count? That would be an easier count for us.
Yeah, it really would. Yeah. Yep. In fact, my Duchesnes came down, I think, from the Montreal area. So there really aren't that many spelled my way.
Well, that's an interesting thing. I'll tell Lee to back off. Get out of your backyard.
Yeah, he's going to have to take a quieter route around my house. Lee. Much of the department is not very visible to the public. I mean, you've got all these biologists who work with non-game species, which you have a responsibility for. You've got some planning people. You've got a lot of land management. You have 100,000 acres in wildlife management areas. We do. We have game management areas around the state accessible to the public and there for the public to use, which I think is a wonderful opportunity for them. Our group, most of the time, would feel very comfortable in not being necessarily visible to the public. Right.
as human nature.
Yep.
But your point's very well taken. Of course, the Warden Service sometimes is a bit more visible, fully uniformed. Law enforcement, that tends to have a higher visibility. Our biologists are out there not only doing their research, but informing people of their research. We make quite a few public appearances, but the people that we have in general, I think they mingle with the public. They commingle. I would say that most of them people are aware of who they are. I don't necessarily know all the time that the public specifically understands what we do, which is partly our fault for not informing them, but I really think that the survey showed this. They just accept the fact that's your job. You do that well, and we accept that you do it well. Please go about your business. We have plenty of information on what we do. We put it out to the public. I have quite a bit recently, particularly. And the public enjoys it, but I think pretty much they sit back and say, the resource is managed by Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. Yep,
and I think that you're correct. People do not really understand the depth of what you do for studying, research, and understanding the resources you're in charge of. They really do. I think of Tom Hodgman, who's retired from the department now. Tom would climb up mountains before daybreak to go count those rare thrushes on the mountaintop.
Yep.
And I've done that before. And that's nuts.
Well, that shows for both of you, for you and Tom, the amount of passion you have for what the exercise is. Because you don't get up in the morning early and go count thrushes on a mountainside unless you have some desire to do so. I mean, it isn't an activity that you're going to particularly enjoy unless you enjoy it. And I think that's the best part about being a Mainer in the resources we have is we most of us just love this state for what it is.
Yeah.
And those resources are phenomenal. And as a hunter, I'm in the woods. I used to be. I'm not as commissioner anymore. I used to be in the woods quite a bit during the seasons. And it wasn't, the hunting for me has never been about necessarily the harvesting of some or killing of some animal. It's the experience of the outdoors. And I think that's what people are. They love the experience of being outside and taking in what the resources are for the state. And some days when you're surprised, when you're out on a walk seeking some other creature and some other thing pops up, it's your best day.
The voice you're hearing belongs to the Commissioner of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, Chandler Woodcock. We're in his office in Augusta, and this is a 30,000-foot view of what it's like to be in charge of wildlife stewardship in Maine. And of course, having the money to do it right is always a challenge, especially since IFW is funded differently than all other departments in state government. The money part in the next segment may really surprise you. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. My guest is Chandler Woodcock, Commissioner of the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, a department that is funded differently than all other agencies in state government. There is federal money, called Pittman-Robertson, which is revenue collected nationally on sales taxes on firearms and ammo. Plus, hunting and fishing licenses fund the department. And there's almost no money from the general state budget, the general fund. That must be a challenge now and then.
Yeah, it is. I appreciate the opportunity to share this with the listeners. Our funding in this department is a unique mechanism. So we have a constitutionally provided protection for all of our license fees, our permit fees. And those go into the general fund of the state, the tax dollars, the general fund, to pay back that fund for lending us money. An example of that is we may have a bill come in for a particular item, and the general fund pays for that item. Our license fees are going into that general fund to replace the monies they spent on us. So technically, we're paying for what we do, but it's through a lend program. And at the end of the year, after June 30th of each fiscal year, we calculate the amount of money that we took in for revenues and licenses and permits, and the amount of money we were allocated by the legislature, by the government. And the difference is what the general fund contributes, the actual true taxpayer's dollar. And honestly, Bob, it's not a whole lot.
It's not at all.
So you talk about somewhere from $1 to $5 million in the cycle. That's a phenomenal investment for what the return is. Yeah. This is a user fee department. And quite a bit of discussion, as you know very well, about the people who participate as non-consumptives, participating in the funding of the department. And there's been quite a bit of sometimes heated discussion about that. And I think you'll see that discussion continue. But in reality, the general fund, the taxpayer dollar of the state, has minimal contribution to the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife.
And again, we really get into the case where the non-consumptive users really aren't paying very much.
No.
And it is an issue. I think you were in the Senate when we dealt with canoe stickers.
I was. The infamous $5 sticker, which floated away about as quickly as you could paddle a canoe.
Didn't that debate suck?
Yeah, it did. It was a wonderful debate. I've always found it to be fascinating, the funding discussion.
Yeah, I mean, but it certainly complicates your job because there's these little pools of money, and they have to be treated.
You have to know where it comes from, and you have to declare it from its source. So if you have dedicated funds for a project, you have to make certain that you account for them in an appropriate fashion, because the grant, the people who have given you grants will expect that, and the state expects it too. It's fascinating to me as I travel to talk about the funding of this department. I would tell you that most people in this state don't have a clue how this department's funded. They think it's all funded by the general fund. Yeah. But the simple reason for that is, though, it says it's funded by the general fund. The general fund does pay our bills. What they don't understand, a lot of people, is that the license fees go back into that general fund to pay for it. So when I hear people all the time say, well, we're paying your tax, I said, no, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. You're paying $4 million or whatever the total is at the end of the year. And it's a great investment. And when they hear that and really begin to appreciate it, they have the same reaction. Wow, that's not very much.
No, it's not very much.
It's really, we get a lot out of that money. Get a lot out of it.
Yeah, but the truth is, we opened up the show by saying how much Mainers love wildlife. We're all heavily invested in what the state is like and what it has to offer. And the fact is, a lot of us aren't ponying up enough cash to help take care of that.
Well, I'll let that discussion carry on the political arena.
Let's get into the political arena then. Deer, you have the issue of doing scientific management of species, but policy is set by the legislature. So you would be in the position where you have to set the number of antlerless deer, any deer permits, for instance, based on the science. And then the legislature will divvy up, okay, who gets to shoot them.
It's the way it works, apparently. and again, it's all about the discussion when we have these topics come up before the legislative committee. We have to be able to present, and the legislature has to be able to present all of the facets of the diamond before the diamond is cut. And when it comes to permits of any kind, moose, deer, whatever, that we draw a lottery for, people have to understand that the more you put a finite restriction on that number, the more the average person, the regular person, is not going to have as many opportunities. And I'm not saying that I don't agree with people over 70 getting an opportunity, the youth having an opportunity in deer hunting. All of those are wonderful opportunities. But if you have X number of permits, that means the remaining number will be smaller once you take a cut off the top.
We're going to get to a work session on some of those bills because there's a bunch of bills that allocate to seniors and youth and stuff. I don't know if this has ever happened in the committee, but what we should first do is say how many permits should be available for the general public, what percentage of the permits, and then after that divvy up the rest into the special youth categories, et cetera.
And I would tell you that I'll assure you of this. That's not the first time the concept has been raised.
Yeah.
Because the protection for the general public, the average person who wants to hunt, is an important part of this discussion. But yet at the same time, when you talk about giving veterans opportunities, giving youth opportunities, very seldom do you find people who are comfortable saying, well, that's not something I'm inclined to do.
Exactly.
But the result of it has to be understood clearly.
Yeah.
So for this year, we're up in permits for deer. We went way up because it was a mild winter. We had some excesses. That changes the dynamic because now the regular person who was more restricted previously has more opportunity, but the percentages are still the same. So if it goes down and you have a rough winter, the graph has real high peaks and real low valleys on the regular person's attempt. There's plenty of opportunity for the average person, but every time you make a special regulation for a user group, it changes the dynamic.
Well, that's just it. There's only a limited number of permits every year.
They're finite.
It's a finite number. The more candy you give out from the candy store, the less there is for everybody else.
Finite. I'll tell you where you really get bumped up against a crowd, and that one is the moose. When you talk about moose, you're going to run. The legislature runs into some real interesting dynamics, and we do too, because we give out 2,000 permits, give or take.
Yeah.
And when you start talking about cutting people out for special reasons, that number starts diminishing a bit. Those people who have waited all this time have a good chance and fewer permits to get a good chance. Ooh, we hear about that one in a hurry. And legislature does, too.
Yeah. My guest is Chandler Woodcock, Commissioner of the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. There are lots of moose bills in the legislature every year because there aren't enough moose to go around. There are always bills about who gets an any deer permit. And we always get some interesting fish bills. There's one this year to allow spear fishing for northern pike in Sebago Lake. Commissioner Woodcock is passionate about fly fishing. So coming up, Will Fisher cut bait on Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. Welcome back to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9, The Ticket. We're spending an hour with Chandler Woodcock, Commissioner of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife for the state of Maine. And that job, unfortunately, is keeping him out of his beloved rivers. Chandler is an avid fly fisherman, and fish management is always an interesting topic because we've got most of the brook trout left in the United States. We have heritage fishing waters. We have arguments over where you can use worms and live bait. Chandler?
It's complicated in wildlife. It's a little more complicated in fisheries, I've always felt, because we have those 10,000 plus bodies of water, and everybody's got their own pet fishing hole. So it's not as if having a special place to hunt deer equates equally to the two bodies of water that you want to have great fishing in. And when it comes time to change a regulation on a person's pet body of water, you're going to hear about it from them. So when we have the public process, there are a lot of people who have very unique interests. And I won't rip them all off because you don't have enough time for me to rip them all off. But ice fishing regulations. I'll just do the simple gamut. Ice fishing regulations, fly fishing regulations, bass fishing versus trout fishing versus invasive species introduction. All of those change the dynamic of our management. So, again, we try to be conservative about fish. Fish turn over in a hurry. And I'll use the landlocked salmon as an example of this. They rely on the rainbow smelt for their food source. So if the smelt runs get screwed up, you're going to lose the salmon. And when salmon go down, it takes a while to get them back again. You just can't grow fish overnight if they're not able to do so. So the question is, how do you manage all this? Well, for me, it's all about habitat.
All starts with that, doesn't it?
You have good habitat, you'll have the ability to raise a good population. So are they naturally reproducing? Or must we supplement them with a stocking system that we have those 8 hatcheries of ours that put in all the fish that we put in during the year? So what decision do you have to make? Do you supplemental stocking on a body of water that has minimal productive ability? Or do you allow and I favor this, do you allow the wild fish to have a really good chance to survive? Because the wild fish is what Maine's really all about, particularly brook trout. We have 90+% of the lake and pond brook trout left in the continental United States, right here in Maine. In those heritage waters, that was my bill when I was back in the legislature to protect those waters. We have over 500 of them now. And as you know, Trout Unlimited and Audubon Society are helping us survey those wild ponds with their volunteers, and we're putting more waters on the heritage list incrementally. Perhaps not as fast as some people would like, but I'm also a real strong believer in you just don't throw everything at the heritage list. The heritage list has to be a unique list too.
Yeah, which is something I'm sure we're going to talk about later on during the session.
Will.
Because the department is so well versed on where all of its populations are, you regulate very closely as to what you can do in certain bodies of stream, even mile by mile in some cases, where the habitat changes. We manage very tightly on just about all of our water. That gets complicated. You
have to. Again, it's about habitat. So if you have an area of a watershed, and there's quite a bit of discussion about watershed management now, which would be a little unique for us, frankly. We don't do that. We may in the future, where you manage the entire watershed with the same set of rules. Hopefully, these are wild fish predominantly we're talking about. Now we manage for stretches. We have rivers in the state that had 9, 10 different regulations on the Kennebec from its source to the ocean. And if the people would just ponder for a second and visualize the Kennebec from its source to the ocean, it's a completely different body of water.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes it's wild, free-flowing up north. Sometimes it's an impoundment area behind the dams. And you get down by the ocean, it's salt. There's a salt, saline portion. So you have to manage them differently because they have different species in them, number one. So what we do is, again, conservatively, try to manage them so that they can live in the habitat, the most fish possible in the habitat for adequate growth and angling opportunity. Now, Bob, there are some areas that just don't grow fish. I mean, the pond isn't able to grow fish. So what we do is put it in there, and it becomes a put-and-take proposition for people. And I've found that people who catch fish just love to catch fish, a lot of them. I remember trolling around Sebago and Moosehead with my grandfather when I was a kid. We did a lot of trolling, my grandfather and I. He was an outdoor guy. And I'd go for hours without having any action on Sebago and Moosehead. And he'd tug my line because I was sleeping at the bow of the boat and wake up, feel as if I had some gigantic salmon on the end of it. You have to have activity in order to make people feel as if, that it's a valuable resource. We manage with that in mind. We stock plenty of places for people, prominently southern part of the state because the resource is different down there with the population base. But we have a ton of great wild fisheries in the state, and I'd encourage people to take advantage of those, too.
So how much has this job impacted your ability to go fly fishing?
Considerably.
Yeah, it's really cut down on your fishing, doesn't it?
Considerably changed my hunting and fishing. I used to be able to hunt several days. I was a high school teacher for many, many years. I would be able to hunt every Saturday during the season, and some afternoons if I could get out quickly enough to do it. I just don't have that time now. I'm busy, and this job means a great deal to me. So I'd like to think I put something back into it. And my wife and I were talking about this the other day. She said, you didn't even hunt last year. That's the first time since I came back from Vietnam that I hadn't hunted during the year.
Wow.
And that was almost 50 years ago now. Fishing, I've kept a logbook. I've kept a journal logbook since 1974 every time I go fishing. And some years, if my wife is listening, Charlie, if you're out there listening, just don't listen to this, okay? There were 50-plus entries in the logbook for a season, and I wasn't guiding. I was just fishing. There have been some 4 and 6 entries for years lately.
Oh, boy.
So it's my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, when they look at that book, they're going to go, what the heck happened to Papa anyway?
Papa got boring.
What happened to Papa got old. He couldn't get
Well, the department does a lot of other things we never touched on. Your wardens are in charge of snowmobile safety and ATV enforcement, and the warden service, of course, protecting our laws. We never even touched on this in the show, but you do all that too. But we've run out of time. Maybe we have to do another show on all the other things the department does that we never
available for you anytime, Bob, we want to have a show. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I want to thank you personally for the opportunity.
I can't believe how fast this hour flew by. My thanks to Chandler Woodcock and the entire Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Department. You're doing a great job. Make a note in your daily planner. Next week's Saturday show is going to start at 8 a.m. It's high school basketball tournament time. So the next episode of Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine will start at 8 a.m. for the next 2 Saturdays, and as soon as the show is over, we'll go over for live coverage of the playoffs. Remember, this show and all previous shows are archived on the web at 929theticket.com. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Napa Auto Parts, Doors Equipment, and EBS. We'll return next Saturday morning at 9 and Sunday morning at 8. This is Sports Radio 929, The Ticket.